Alright, bookworms and constant readers, welcome back to Final Girl Horror. Today is part 2 of my review of the 1001 albums you must hear before you die. If you haven't seen part 1, definitely go and check it out. If you want to listen to the albums that are in this book, I am leaving a link in the description below. It is a 2-part playlist on Spotify. I didn't make it for Apple Music, sorry. At the time I started this book, I was only listening to Spotify. I recently got an iPhone, so now I have Apple Music as well, but I'm not doing it for Apple Music. But yeah, I will leave the links below for the playlist. The reason it's a 2-part playlist, I learned Spotify limits you on the number of songs that you can put in a playlist. And that number is 10,000. So that part 1 playlist will take you from 1955 to, I think, like 93, 94, 95, somewhere around in there. And then part 2 picks up where part 1 left off, and it will take you all the way to 2005. So in this video, I'm going to talk about all of the decades, how many albums per decade, what I liked, what I didn't like, and then I will give it a final rating. So before we get started, I just want to say, I love music. Music is probably the only thing I love more than books and reading. I listen to music 4 to 6 hours a day on average, every day. A day without music, I don't know what the hell that is. And I listen to so many different genres of music that this is where I'm coming from when I review this list. And the way this list is presented, I look at it as like it should be a history of music from 1955 to 2005. And some of the best music from each decade, from each year. And it's not really that. I think it's a lot of opinions and not so much popularity of what people were listening to at the time. And I'll talk about that more as I go through the list. But I love lists like this. If you go to my Spotify page, you'll see I have tons of playlists that are based on lists. Like 100 greatest rock songs according to VH1, Rolling Stones top 500 songs of all time. And there's usually stuff I disagree with, but for the most part, I think, hey, they got it right. There is so much on this list that they got wrong. It's terrible. So let's get into it. So the list starts in the 50s. You got 1955 to 1959. There's 23 albums. This is by far the best listening experience on the list. I mean, it has such a variety of music. Frank Sinatra, you get Elvis, Little Richard, Buddy Holly, Miles Davis. There's not a lot of country or blues. But it's a really cool variety of music. And it shows that era between, like the crooners and jazz and big band was kind of dying out, and rock and roll was starting to take a hold. I've seen some people complain that there's not enough rock and roll on the 50s list. But you have to think, not every station was playing rock and roll. There was this huge movement to stop rock and roll in its tracks. A lot of religious people, a lot of religious organizations and churches were like, this is the devil's music, stop it, get it off the air. Stations were boycotting rock and roll. They refused to play rock and roll records. If they did play rock and roll, it was late at night or in the early hours, like 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, when nobody's up listening. So I don't have an issue with that. I really enjoyed the 50s. Now come the 60s. 151 albums, 1960 to 1969. And this is where the list really starts to fall apart, and the problems with the list, they just compound decade after decade until 2005. So there is still a variety of music going on with the 60s, but some of the glaring issues is the things that aren't on the list. You have none of that like early guitar instrumentals that were popular, like Dick Dale, Mazzulu, or like any of the Venture songs like Apache, Walk Don't Run, Sleepwalk. There's no like Link Ray, none of that. Also, you don't have that early to mid 60s like Southern California rock and roll where it was about surfing and cars, like Jan and Dean type stuff. One of the biggest like snubs is Motown. There's no like Supremes or Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, the Temptations. Motown was huge in the 60s. And then, of course, there was no protest songs highlighted. There was no Woodstock soundtrack. I think that was another one of the big things missing is the soundtrack to the film Woodstock. It really highlighted, I think, kind of what was going on at the time and what was popular. There is really good representation of the British invasion. But like I said, this book and this list does have a lot of British bias. Also, I thought they did a good job of highlighting like the rise of folk and jam bands, Joan Baez, Bob Dylan, the Grateful Dead. But there was very little like R&B and soul, very little blues, very little country. And the 70s gets even worse. The 70s had the most albums of any decade, 279 albums, 1970 to 79. And it also had some of the worst albums. I wrote some down, and if you like any of these, good on you. I'm never going to criticize anybody for the music they listen to. I thought these albums were terrible, and just like, what the hell are they doing on this list? I will never listen to these ever again. You have stuff like Tangerine Dream, Phaedra, Mike Oldfield, Tubular Bells, Hawkwind, Space Rebel, The Residents, Duck Stab, and probably the biggest, like worst album out of the 1001 albums is Throbbing Gristle, and the album is DOA Third and Final Report. It was terrible. Just freaking terrible. Some of the worst music I've ever heard. And then this is also where you start getting a lot of the repeat artist. And this is where it becomes irritating to me as someone who loves music and has a good grasp on the history of music, when you you put all of these repeat artists, but you're leaving people off. Another thing with this is the no soundtrack thing. You're missing out on iconic soundtracks once again. Like, if you want like the sound of the 70s, get the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack. And when I think of the 70s, really two things come to mind. I think of disco, number one. I think of hard rock. But I also think of what used to be called soft rock. And now they have this idiotic name for it. I don't know where it came from. I haven't watched the documentary yet. They call it yacht rock. It's fucking soft rock. Christopher Cross, Michael McDonald, stuff like that. It's soft rock. And none of that is really highlighted here in the 70s. There's very little country, there's very little blues. But you have every single Talking Heads album. You have every single Elvis Costello album. Why? So moving on to the 80s, it gets even worse. The 80s had 210 albums, 1980 to 1989. Same issues here. Too many repeat artists. Like I said in the book review, my question to the people who chose the albums, because now you're getting into my generation of music. I was a kid in the 80s. I grew up in the 80s. And 80s and 90s music is really like near and dear to my heart. As a kid, all I did was listen to the radio. As I got older, in the 90s are near and dear to my heart because now I'm able to buy my own concert tickets and go to concerts and go to clubs and see bands instead of just hear them on the radio. And I just want to know, like, do the people who put this list together not realize that there was more to the 80s than synth pop? Yes, the synthesizer was a huge part of the 80s, but that wasn't all the 80s was. Another thing that irritated me is, why is every Kate Bush album on this list? You know, I grew up in the 80s. I never even heard of Kate Bush until I watched Stranger Things. And that goddamn Running Up That Hill song, that song is horrible. But you should listen to her other stuff. It's just as bad. And I never heard of her, and I found out through Stranger Things, trying to find out, like, who is this person? Why do they keep playing this song? The reason she was never really big in the United States is she has a fear of flying, and she refused to tour over here because of that. But for some reason, all of her albums are on this list, and none of them are that good or memorable. And then, one of the biggest snubs, I think, of the 80s is there's no country. Country took a rise in the 80s that continued into the 90s, and this wave of country music, they're still writing it today. It is one of the most popular genres in the United States, and it's totally underrepresented in this book. In the 80s, you had country icons like Alabama, George Strait, Randy Travis. None of them are on this list. Also, blues saw a big rise in the 80s and into the 90s, but there's no B.B. King, there's no Buddy Guy, no Albert Collins, no Eric Clapton. Into the 90s, no Stevie Ray Vaughan. Also, you have really big, iconic hit makers of the 80s that are not represented. There's no Bryan Adams. Bryan Adams' album Reckless, it has like 12 or 13 songs on it, 14 songs, something like that. And it's like 8 of them were hits. There's no Huey Lewis. And another thing that is very underrepresented is hair bands. There's not a lot of hair bands on this list. One thing this list does well in the 70s, the 80s, and into the 90s that I've never seen a list do, and I appreciate it because this is one of my favorite genres of music, is punk rock. Punk rock is highly represented on this list. There is stuff on this list that if you don't love punk rock like I do, you've never heard of it. And I was really surprised to see some of the punk rock bands on this list that people don't know about. You know, stuff outside of the Ramones, outside of the Clash. And so into the 90s, I'm telling you right now, it almost broke me. The 90s, I almost abandoned this list and said, fuck it, I'm done. That's how bad the 90s were. 239 albums from 1990 to 1999. And it was painful to get through. This is where I start. So I was listening to these playlists every day. And this is where I started taking a break. Like, I couldn't take it. It started out as like one day a week, I'm going to listen to something that I love, something that I enjoy, because every album was just, this is terrible. Why is it on here? And then it went to 2 days, and I finally made it through. And again, it's just all of these unknown, unheard of bands, mostly from Britain, and they're mostly electronic, house, dance, techno. There was more to the 90s than just that. Again, you know, where is the country? Where's rock and roll? Blues? It's non-existent on this list. You would think that the 90s was all techno and dance with a little bit of grunge rock and roll thrown in. And then we get to the 2000s. There's only 99 albums, thank God, because at this point, like, I'm ready to throw in the towel. I'm done. I'm sick of this list. Like, fuck the people who came up with this list. 2000 to 2005. Surprisingly, the 2000s really improved. It wasn't as painful as the 90s, and I got through it pretty quick. But again, there's too many repeat artists. Like, one of the ones I got sick of hearing is Nick Cave. Why do we need every single Nick Cave album? He's not that good. There was no like boy bands. The 90s and 2000s, some of the biggest things that were missing also was like the R&B craze that happened. You know, Barry White, Boys to Men. None of that's on there. Also, country. The rise of country in the 80s continued into the 90s. And it's not even a part of this list. There's no Garth Brooks. Love him or hate him, Garth Brooks took country to a whole new level and brought it to the masses and made it okay to like country music. There's no Alan Jackson. There's no Brooks and Dunn. Think of any 90s country artist that had hits and was popular. They're not on here because country is not on here. And the same with blues and rock and roll. It's on here a little. But this list as a whole, I think, is total dog shit. I gave the list a 1 out of 5. I gave the book a 2 out of 5. And I stick to that. There's a lot of great stuff on this list. But there is a lot of bullshit on this list. And I think the problem is they chose albums. I think if it would have been like songs, it would have been a whole lot easier to put together like 1,001 great songs versus albums. Because you're trying to get to a wide range of people. And like I said, music is very subjective. And getting 1,001 albums together that everybody can agree on that is great, I don't think it's going to happen. I don't know that I could do like 10 albums that I think everybody would think is great. Maybe, like to give you an example of what I think a great album is, and I think for the most part anybody would like it, is Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. It is one of the greatest albums of all time. It was on the Hot 100 albums for like, I think 12 years or some shit. Another great one is Paul Simon's Graceland. But there's probably people out there that hate those albums. But I think those albums would resonate with more people than some no-name, electronic band from the UK. And that's where this list, it falls apart. It was an interesting journey. If you're wondering how long it took me to get through this list, I started the list in November of 2024, and I finished it in June of 2025. That's listening 4 to 6 hours a day. I didn't count like how many albums per day. I just put the list on and let it play. It didn't shuffle or anything. I listened every album in its entirety. And yeah, it took me from November to June. So if you're wanting to check out the playlist, I'll put the links to my Spotify playlist in the description box. Please give this video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the bell icon so you know when new videos come out. And until next time, read more books.